Ivy League schools have gotten way too big for their britches. They think they're secure atop the education establishment in the U.S., but they're wrong. There's a new trend in higher education that will replace the intellectually bankrupt Ivy Leagues. Watch out, Harvard. The age of the philosopher plumber is coming, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You've made yourself irrelevant, but you're so proud that you can't even see it. This is Brad Bright. Welcome to the God is the Issue podcast, where I show how God is the issue in every issue. In the last 10 years, Americans' confidence in higher education has dropped from 57% to 36%. That's over 20 points in 10 years. Let me ask you, what happens when a sitting president's favorable ratings drop from 57% to 36%? They lose the next election. Mainstream higher education today is creating adults who no longer value freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, or freedom of speech. 53% of college students today support censorship. In other words, that the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights are no longer taught. In the last 15 years, 300 colleges in the U.S. have closed their doors, totally shuttered their doors. That's about 20 colleges per year. However, that number has now accelerated to 50 colleges per year. It's estimated that enrollment in higher education will decrease another 15% in the next 5 years. And my best guess is that another 300 colleges will close in that same 5-year period. A massive tidal wave is building. Now, in the last 50 years, the cost of higher education tripled in real dollars. But while the cost of higher education has been skyrocketing, the quality has just plummeted. I mean, for instance, SAT and ACT exams have been renormed, meaning dumbed down, several times in the last 75 years to compensate for the lack of quality education. I remember about 20 years ago, I was talking with a friend of mine who worked in the White House under George W. Bush. He told me that the White House interns who came from the best universities across the country were not readers. Now, by that, he meant they did not read books unless it was required for a class. Now, 20 years later, professors at our elite institutions are saying that their smartest students can't read books. How did we get from don't read books to can't read books in just 20 years? The only institutions that will survive this going forward are those with huge endowments, those who are underwritten by our tax dollars, whether they do a good job or not, and those who innovate to offer an exceptional education at a much lower cost. Now, here's the exciting part. I believe it is this third category of higher learning that will produce the intellectual giants of the next generation, and such institutions are popping up all over the place. You see, Harvard and the Ivy League think they're too big to fail. But if they don't start taking education seriously, others will replace them. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I think it will happen a lot faster than most people expect. You see, the dramatic way that Columbia University utterly failed in its primary mission last spring makes that stunningly clear. In my last podcast, I said we must heed Jesus' exhortation to be shrewd as snakes, but as innocent as doves. I would go even further to say that it is virtually impossible to be as innocent as doves if we are not also shrewd as snakes, and that is very, very shrewd. Although a quality education isn't necessary to be shrewd, it certainly helps, doesn't it? Especially an education that trains you how to think rather than what to think. That is an institution that teaches critical thinking, not critical theory. Now, there's a growing trend in higher education today that reimagines education. I think Hillsdale College and Patrick Henry College have been two of the most successful at rethinking education, and the proof is in the results. For instance, today, the LSAT scores of Patrick Henry students are higher on average than the scores of their Ivy League counterparts, and my godson is one of them. And they did all that in 24 short years since their founding in the year 2000. But they're not alone. I keep on hearing of new institutions of higher education springing up all over the country who are pursuing academic excellence from day one. They're investing their money in students. not in the effects of cocaine on bees, not in a lap dancer's secret weapon, not in DEI, not in the theoretical existence of unicorns, but in serious education. Now, there are two primary categories: classical Christian-based institutions and Catholic institutions. Almost all of them have gotten rid of tenure for professors, and yet thousands of academics are still clamoring to teach at many of these new colleges, even without tenure. Now, these innovative schools, they can adapt to current opportunities faster, more effectively, and at far less cost to the students because they don't have tenure or a lot of dead weight. They're focused on real education. My dad observed that it's easier to create a new structure than to rescue an old one. He never hesitated to launch a new structure inside or outside the old one if the old order wasn't getting the job done. That's what's happening in higher education today. Now here's one fascinating trend that I've begun seeing that both surprises me and encourages me. Some of the new institutions even teach students a trade while teaching them philosophy and theology. Think about that for a moment. The age of the philosopher plumber looms just over the horizon. Can you imagine debating Aristotle, Augustine, Descartes, and the Apostle Paul with your plumber? It's coming. And that's great news for America. If our plumbers are thinkers, never again will politicians be able to say that a mentally ill man is a woman or a woman is a man. They'll be mistaken for comedians or even idiots. Now, never again will the intellectual elites be able to pretend that survival of the fittest is sufficient basis for love your neighbor, as the young people term it, to be kind. You can't get from survival of the fittest to love your neighbor without committing intellectual suicide. Our tradesmen and women are the backbone of our country. They interact with us in our homes, workplaces, and communities. They have a better pulse on real Americans than the politicians, the corporate CEOs, and the tenured elites pontificating from their ivory towers. You see, a philosopher plumber is a powerful person, but a philosopher plumber follower of Jesus can change the world. Do you doubt me? Do you remember the tent maker philosopher in the first century who helped change the course of history? His name was Paul. Oh, and don't forget, he was the follower of a carpenter named Jesus. Now, during this coming Christmas season, let me encourage you that when you talk with young people about their future, encourage them to explore all the options before them. Urge them to pursue an education that will lay a foundation for a shrewdly led life that brightly shines the love of Jesus wherever they live and work. Folks, our future will not spring from the decaying Ivy League bastions of silliness. Those are old, spent, worn-out wineskins. Their best days have come and gone. Our future will usher forth from fresh institutions that innovate and provide real education, that teach students how to think rather than what to think, and that teach students how to read entire books, cover to cover. And it will come primarily from those unsullied institutions that teach that God, not survival of the fittest, is the basis of morality and the good life. God is the issue in every issue, including innovation in higher education. This is Brad Bright. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this podcast helpful, please like and subscribe. And when subscribing, don't forget to click on the bell so you'll be notified whenever I publish a new podcast. And please, don't forget to share this podcast, especially for the sake of the next generation. God bless.